Hi designers! For this project, you'll be using the Shape tool and your knowledge of the principles of design to create 3 different compositions which communicate a war or a conflict between 2 types of shapes. Here you see one design where I used arrows and a target. Here's another one with spirals and a starburst shape. And then another one with leaves and snowflakes. So you'll be creating 3 designs using 2 different shapes in each one. Let's start off by creating a new file. Put your last name, first name, and this is 3.3 Shape Wars. The dimensions are 16 by 16 inches with a resolution of 200, and you can put this into CMYK color. Next, you need to locate the Shape tool, which is towards the bottom of your toolbar. If you click and hold on it, you'll see you have several geometric shapes. Today we're going to be using the Custom Shape tool. Then go up to your Options bar and locate the Shapes menu. Click on it and you'll have a drop-down box with a few of these shapes. If you don't see all of them, click on this little arrow right here and add all of these different shape groups to your Shapes menu. The dialog box will ask you if you want to replace. Please select Append. That's going to add the shapes to your library of shapes. And then you should have all the ones that you see here. For this project, you're going to pick 2 shapes for each design. So you can pick any 2. You are trying to communicate a conflict or some sort of war between these 2 shapes. So you could choose things that are opposites, but really this will work with any 2 shapes. So for this example, I'll choose the moon. Click and drag to create the shape. You may also want to hold Shift to keep the proportion intact. Otherwise, it could get stretched out. The Shape tool uses your foreground color when it's first drawing the shape. To change the color of the shape, double-click on the layer thumbnail over here in the Layers panel, and then you can use the color picker to change the color. And then I need another shape, so I'll choose maybe a sun. The sun and the moon are opposites. Like I said, you don't have to choose things that are literally opposites. Any 2 shapes will work, whatever interests you. Again, I'm going to go ahead and change the color here. Now, you're going to use a different color scheme for each design. So when you're first starting out, choose your color scheme. Since the moon is associated with blue, I'm going to use a complementary color scheme. The complement of blue is orange, so I'm going to use different shades of orange for my different sun shapes. Then you can use the Move tool to place these shapes in the design and the transform controls to both rotate and resize these shapes. And to create duplicates of these shapes, you can hold Option while you're using the Move tool and click on the shape and you can drag out another copy. Again, use Transform, using that principle of scale to create visual interest and visual movement. You can rotate the shapes to give them a little bit of variety. The sun shape is very, very similar. You can't even see it as it rotates there. There we go. And then also you can create more variety by changing up the colors slightly, reordering the layers, and just in general creating a composition which communicates the war between the 2 types of shapes. Let me show you a couple different examples. In this example where I used the arrows, you can see I unified the groups of shapes by color. So I used a monochromatic, actually an achromatic color scheme here with the shades of gray for the arrows. I used scale and a very strong sense of movement. Arrows are directional, and when you line them up, they really create a sense that they're moving back into the distance, about to hit the target. I wanted the emphasis to be on this red target, so I chose a really bright color, and then I created a strong contrast by leaving the background white, using the gray in the arrows, so there's no color to compete with the strong bright color of the red target. And then when I did use the other target shapes, I put them in the background. I'll actually show you the group here. And I used various colors, analogous colors for these targets so they would go together. And at first it looked like this. I used slightly lighter colors so it would look like it's going back in the distance. I also made the shapes smaller to make them look like they're going back in the distance. But I realized there was not enough contrast here. The orange target was too similar to the red target, and it was competing with the red target visually. It was drawing my attention away from the red target. So I put these in a group, and you can do that by holding Shift on your keyboard and selecting all the layers that you want to group. You can either go up to Layer, Group Layers, or you can see here that the shortcut is Command G to put those together. And then I decided to lower the opacity of all of those. That way I still have that visual interest and that repetition of the layers in the background, but they're not competing. It's a much lower contrast situation here. You'll notice I used radial balance to where the arrows are going around the center. The targets in the background also continue that radial balance. And because I use so many shapes, so many arrow shapes and so many target shapes, I decided to leave this negative space blank and even just leave it white. That way I would have this strong contrast between the arrows and the target and the background. Another thing that you need to think about is your negative space. Not only space for the eye to rest and to create contrast, but also the smaller negative spaces that you're creating in between shapes as you place them. Your negative shapes should be just as interesting as your positive shapes. So as you place them around here, take a look at your negative shapes, the spaces in between, and make sure there's no awkward spaces. You'll notice each one of these is kind of its own shape and has its own space here in the white area. This one right here might be the exception. It's a rather small space. If it was any smaller, it might look awkward. I could actually move this arrow down just a bit to make it a bit larger. But I do like how the tail of this arrow comes up and covers the corner, because that keeps my eye going around in this movement, using that principle of movement in this way. Okay? So this has a strong sense of movement and a lot of contrast. Another example, this was my second example, you can use overlapping shapes. And this was a really interesting one to work on. I used a complementary color scheme with red, orange, and a teal blue here. But I used all different shades of red, orange. And this was really interesting to work with these different colors and the contrast, or even the simultaneous contrast of these leaves. Let me just show you. If I change the background color to something a little bit lighter, this is going to completely change the look. I have to change both of these in order to get the correct color. So it completely changes the look because it changes the amount of contrast in the background. I decided that I wanted a dark background so that the leaves would pop out against the dark background. This also creates a nice contrast for the snowflakes. And then my last example here, I chose these very complex shapes, the spiral and the starburst, and I used a lot of them and I connected them together in a certain way. And then I even created these extra layers on top here where I duplicated the spiral, and then I used the eraser tool to erase parts of it to make it look like the spiral was actually coming through parts of the starburst. This is an approximately symmetrical composition if you divide it diagonally this way. This group of starbursts is actually the same as this group of starbursts. I just rotated them around to make it look a little bit different. I used very low contrast on this image, the light pink versus the mint blue and the lighter brown, because I already knew that there was going to be a lot of visual interest when it came to the starburst shapes and the spirals. So I wanted to kind of not make it too hard to look at. There's a lot of unity. All of the shapes have the same color. That's different than what I did in the other two. I created variety both in the leaves here and in the arrows and the targets here. So I'm thinking about all of the principles of design. So the first thing, you just start working with your shapes, putting them into a composition, and then you can use the guiding questions on your handout to help you start thinking through how you're using the principles of design. All right, hope you have fun waging war with your shapes.